Hello, librarians. Today is a lovely day in New York City. I am Chris Vicari of Union Square and Company, and on behalf of my wonderful colleague Annie Mazes of the Hachette Book Group, we bring you the first ever Booked and Buzzy program. Two authors, two book buzzes in 30 minutes. And with that said, I now hand off to my colleague Annie Mazes.
Hello, thank you, Chris. I am so honored today to welcome Thrity Umrigar. Thrity is the best-selling author of 9 previous novels, including Honor, which was a Reese's Book Club pick, and The Museum of Failures, which was a Library Reads pick. She's also written 4 picture books and a memoir. Her books have been published in over 15 countries and in several languages. A former journalist, she has contributed to the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, the New York Times, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and many other newspapers. She is a recipient of the Nieman Fellowship to Harvard and a winner of the Cleveland Arts Prize, the Seth Rosenberg Prize, and a Lambda Literary Award. She is currently a distinguished university professor of English at Case Western Reserve University. Welcome, Thrity. We are so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Annie. I really appreciate the introduction. And good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for being here. First, I just want to thank you for the essential work that all of you do as librarians, especially during these very fraught times. I know you've heard this from other writers, but I think it bears repeating. Without librarians, authors would simply be humming their novels to themselves. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my latest work, Missing Sam. So Missing Sam is my first ever mystery novel. My previous 9 novels have been what is known as literary fiction, a term that frankly has always made me wince a little bit because it just sounds so damn self-important. But this is my first genre novel. And truth be told, Missing Sam is also a commentary on our lives today as a community, as a society, and most certainly as a nation. It uses the tropes of the mystery novel or the thriller to really do a close examination of the times that we live in. And as such, it made sense to me to set my novel in the town where I currently live, which is Cleveland Heights, Ohio. I want to tell you a little bit about what made me write this book and, how it came to me. So for as long as I can remember, I'm someone who has always loved to walk. Sometimes with a friend, sometimes with a borrowed dog or so, but usually by myself and almost always in the mornings. In fact, that's how I write. I compose that day's chapter or test out dialogue or develop my plot lines as I walk. I'm one of those writers who's deathly afraid of the tyranny of a blank page. As someone who grew up in the city of Bombay, crazy traffic, crowded streets, noise, chaos, I've always been struck by the almost eerie quiet of suburban America. Even before the silence and stillness descended upon us in the early days of COVID, I used to marvel at how the residential streets of Cleveland Heights emptied out by dinner time each evening. There were mornings when I didn't see another human being for a couple of blocks as I walked. And even as I enjoyed the solitude, I used to think there's something unnatural about this. I have a relative who each time he'd visit me from India used to count the number of people walking on the sidewalks that we would encounter from the airport to my home. And if he hit the double digits, he would virtually jump up with excitement. Then a few years ago, I began to think, God, if something would happen to someone on these quiet streets, nobody would hear or see a thing. It wasn't that I was afraid for my safety, far from it. It was simply the genesis of an idea that kept gnawing at me and that would eventually become Missing Sam. Around that same time, I was reading novels that appeared to have taken their cues from the success of Gone Girl, novels where white women disappeared and their spouses became objects of suspicion. And while many of these novels were well written and, really great novels, it seemed to me that the issues that they dealt with were personal and psychological. But I had begun to think of my novel around 2019, when immigrants and Muslims were being targeted not just by the government, but sometimes by fellow citizens. I've always been one of those irritating people who greets every person she passes on the street. Like one of my protagonists, Ali, I've led a pretty charmed existence in America. I suppose my education and middle-class status have protected me from some of the indignities suffered by undocumented immigrants. And so it was odd to suddenly, for the first time in my life, be conscious of my brown skin. I remember one day when I was walking in my own neighborhood, and there was this guy coming from the opposite direction. As we passed one another, I said hello, as I always do, but he looked right through me as he kept walking. And even as I tried to figure out if this was a deliberate slight or something accidental, I wondered, have I changed? Or has the country changed? I didn't know which fact would devastate me more. And slowly the idea for the novel began to form in my head, and the two major characters, one white, one brown, both female and gay, began to take shape. I asked myself, in this era of suspicion and division, in the age of social media, where anonymous mobs target and dox strangers, what would happen to an interracial female couple if the white spouse were to mysteriously disappear? What would happen to the woman who's left behind, especially if she was the Muslim daughter of immigrants? I wanted to dial up the tension to see how much stress this couple, whose union was condemned by their respective religions and their families, and who also battled their own personalities and family histories, could endure before cracking. I was trying, I suppose, to test two propositions. One, the strength of their marriage, and two, the strength of our nation's commitment to justice and fairness. The novel is told in two voices, Samantha's and Ali's. Each narrates her own story. There is also a third voice, and their story is narrated in the third person. I wanted the reader to hear from each woman in her own voice without the filter of the author's voice intervening. Despite the divisions in our society that the book touches upon, or perhaps because of it, this is a book about family, reconciliation, and healing. So I hope you enjoy reading Missing Sam. I hope you will fall in love with Sam and Ali. And I hope that you will join this immigrant in her mad and complicated love for America, and in her belief in its boundless capacity to heal itself. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thrity. We certainly look forward to your new book. I am again Chris Vicari of Union Square and Company, and I'm here to introduce Jacob Rollinson, the author of The Truth of Carcosa, a novel in which evil books, shadowy corporations, and interdimensional monsters collide in a dark, masterful tribute Robert Chambers' cult classic, The King in Yellow, a book which remains a topic of horror world discussion. Jacob was born in England, where he continues to live and today works as an academic librarian. Please put your hands together and say hello to Jacob Rollinson.
Hello, fellow librarians. It's an honor to be here. I'm really excited to be able to share my book. Thank you very much, Thrity, for introducing her book so well. It sounds amazing, frankly. To get on to my own, The Truth of Carcosa. I have a great deal of difficulty talking about my own work. So to break the ice, I'm going to start off by simply reading the blurb that was written very well and succinctly so that we can talk about how it was written afterwards. Plot of The Truth of Carcosa is, in 1984, exiled author Salvatore Arcimboldi accepts the help of a psychotherapist to write his new book. He hopes to transform his traumatic memories into literary genius, but the resulting book, The Truth of Carcosa, is pure evil. Horrified, he suppresses the book, wills all traces of it and his correspondence to be destroyed. Long after his death, in a chaotic age of resurgent nationalism and violence, one of the only havens for his work is the ALI, the Archive for Literary Investment, where a biographer and his protege search through Arcimboldi's correspondence for clues on the evil manuscript as they attempt to stop unscrupulous firms with their own plans for the work. So this is a book about an evil book. The seed of this book was sown when I was working in an archive myself, actually. I was in an archive of contemporary fiction. I was doing a job where I had to summarize the correspondence of a pretty well-known author and write it in such a way that researchers could use it for their own research. I particularly enjoyed this work because I found the atmosphere within this space. While it was a perfectly pleasant space, well lit, it wasn't shadowy, it wasn't kind of creepy in a traditional sense. I found the quiet and the fact that you were frequently uncovering previously undisclosed connections between people and places and things really quite uncanny, and in a way that I very much enjoyed. And after completing the placement in that particular place, I came across the book, The King in Yellow, myself. Now, The King in Yellow is a collection of short stories interlinked. They are linked by a character called the King in Yellow, who is essentially a demigod-like figure that lives in a different realm, but wants to exert power within the human realm. And he does so through a play, The King in Yellow, which, if anybody ever reads it, they will be sent mad and become essentially an acolyte of the King in Yellow. A really fun book to read and a really fun book to analyze and think about. It was written in 1895, but it feels weirdly prescient, especially the kind of science, the kind of speculative fiction elements of certain stories. When I first encountered this book, I was so excited about it, I started writing little essays about it. And the essays, they took on a certain voice, as a kind of stereotypical scholarly voice of somebody who's rather verbose, rather pompous, maybe full of themselves. And it was a lot of fun to produce these little things. And then around that time, the COVID-19 pandemic started, and I was sent home and became quite sick. And possibly as a consequence of the fevers that I experienced, the essays I was writing about the King in Yellow started to take on a slightly different tenor, a more paranoid and fanciful tenor, if you will. And it soon became apparent to me that I was not writing essays about the King in Yellow. I was writing a piece of fiction about a cursed book, as if from the perspective of someone who had been infected by a said cursed book. And that's when I decided to embark upon the project of bringing this mythos, the yellow mythos, into the present day. And once I realized that's what I wanted to do, I started to think about building the world in which this reader with his cursed book existed. And I thought back to the archive that I've been working in, and I thought especially about the way in which archives, as parts of educational institutions, have to a certain extent, pay their way. They aren't just places where knowledge is kept, they're treated as essentially stores of assets that will in some way be monetized by the institution that owns them. And so once I started thinking about a cursed book like The King in Yellow, like The Truth of Carcosa, in terms of an asset that an institution might want to control, the other elements of the novel started to fall into place. It became less a novel about the interplay of symbols within stories that I'd originally planned, and became more about powerful forces attempting to control a dangerous asset. Relevant also is the metaphor of the Yellow King being a really powerful metaphor for spreading or invasive malign influence. It started to become apparent that the characters that I was writing who were reading and invested in this cursed book could be compared in many ways to a person who was being radicalized by damaging conspiracy theories, misinformation, and lies. And so more than just being a book about an evil book, it became a book about a pervasive evil force, often symbolized by this evil book, bringing in the age of resurgent nationalism and authoritarianism in which we live. I believe that may be the end of my presentation about the King in Yellow, about the Truth of Carcosa.
Thank you very much, Jacob. We certainly look forward to your book, and thanks again to Thrity. Thanks to both of you for taking time to be with us today. We are now going to talk about some other books that we have coming up. Here are some titles coming from Union Square and Company. The Venice Double by Jesse DeRoy picks up where Safecracker left off, with ringleader Duke Duquesne going to Italy with a team that will remind no one of Ocean's 11 for a heist with dire consequences if it fails. Get your tumblers ready for book 2 in the Safecracker series. Next is The Encore by Juliet Eizon. Good for readers who loved the rhythms of Daisy Jones and the Six. A 16-year-old piano virtuoso named Lottie begins a quest to find the woman who gave her up at birth. Turns out her birth mother is a successful musician. Her father, a successful composer. A chain of events reunites them all and forces them together on a tour bus for a cross-country trip, where the three must reconcile with past choices, including the fact that the birth father never knew he had a child. The Encore is a repeat performance on the stage and in life. Next is Wife House by Sonia Walger. Annie and Hector are a married couple who let their friends and son stay in the guest house at Christmas dinner. That son's 26-year-old friend joins, and a stable home life for Annie begins to splinter as she finds herself making decisions she never imagined. Through shifting perspectives, a messy but nuanced portrait It's painted of a woman who walks away from every role expected of her and what that decision means for everyone in her life. Author Sonia Walger is an actress best known for playing Penny on Lost, but her first book, Lion, published earlier this year, it was called Seductive by the Wall Street Journal. Cocina Puerto Rico chef Mia Castro has worked with top chefs and competed on Beat Bobby Flay, where she beat Bobby Flay in pandemic 2020. Grounded in New York City, she craved the foods of her native Puerto Rico, so over FaceTime calls with her abuela in San Juan, she collected the recipes that represent her family's homeland. Now you can bring those signature flavors and history of Puerto Rico to your next home kitchen. A little bit extra, Chef Riley Meehan is known on social media for giving a behind-the-scenes peek at his work as a private chef. Now in a little bit extra, he tells you the secrets he uses to impress his clients, not just popular flavors and ingredients. His recipes always feature a little twist that take them from good to really, really, really good. Most of us can't afford a private chef, but with a little bit extra, it will feel like you can. And lastly, Unread. Author Oliver James went viral at age 34 in the year 2022 when he went on TikTok and said, "What's up? I can't read." He did more than say it, though. He decided to learn to read as an adult and document struggles and triumphs along the way. He went from barely being able to read a food menu to his goal of finishing 100 books a year. This is his full story through 21 key books that shaped and informed him. His story reveals that it's never too late to grow. Those are the Union Square books, my friends. And now back to my colleague Annie Mazes to hear about some more great books coming soon.
Hello, hello. Thank you, Christopher. This is my email address. You all reach out whenever you'd like. Please. I like to talk about books. I like to give you some arcs if we have them. My first book I'm going to talk about is Aisha. Aisha is based on the myth of Morocco's warrior goddess, her strange magic, her fierce rebellion, and devastating romance. Debut author Soraya Bouazoui weaves an epic tale of female rage that takes place during the last days of Portugal's colonial empire in Morocco. This is perfect for fans of The City of Brass and The Stardust Thief. Next up, we have Ruins, which is a teen favorite. We're big fans of Lily Brooks Dalton's The Light Pirate, which was critically acclaimed and best-selling. Ruins is a sweeping, deeply resonant novel set 3,000 years in the future, and lest you think that that is fantastical, science fiction-y, this book is much more literary. It is so speculative, it's rich, but it is set in the future, and it is about an archaeologist in search of an ancient artifact that could not only change her life, but upend the story of civilization itself. So good. There are like 4 books in this. It's perfect for book clubs. Next up, we have some nonfiction titles, including The Typewriter and the Guillotine, which I am in the middle of and I am obsessed with, and I want a documentary and I want a TV series and I want everything about this story. It is a fascinating, untold story of a trailblazing Paris correspondent for The New Yorker who started with The New Yorker in the 20s and wrote from Paris through the 30s. She sounded the alarm about the rise of fascism in Europe while becoming enmeshed in the sensational case of a German serial killer stalking the streets of Paris on the eve of World War II. I cannot say enough good things about this book. It is so fast-paced and informative, and there's so much in it that reflects the time we're living in now, but it's just like really rich and hopeful. So love this book. And last, I'm going to talk about American Men, which follows the structural blueprint of Lisa Taddeo's Three Women. It rotates between 4 characters' perspectives, each of whom Jordan spent years following. The men he chose to feature are people of color, white, straight, gay, cis, and trans. It offers a truly inclusive representative examination of the male American experience and explores how each of these people construct their relationship to masculinity and how they navigate that relationship over time. And lest my description of this sound too clinical, this is an incredibly beautifully presented and personal story. I will say that when I heard the title, I was like, okay, but it is so much about these people and what they deal with and how they present themselves and how they are coping with who they are and trying to figure out how to be the person they want to be. And last slide is all about our book club catalog. If you follow this link, we have many, many reading guide, discussion questions on this digital catalog. Lots to talk about. Every title has a lot of meat to it. So perfect to start conversations. Thank you, Chris, Thrity, and Jacob, and to all of you for taking the time to tune into our inaugural Booked and Buzzy. We will be doing more of these in future, so keep an eye out for the next one in early 2026. Bye for now. Thank you.